Throughout his life, Christopher Hitchens became well known as a famous atheist, prolific political writer, philosopher, and arguably one of the greatest debaters of all time, debating well-known names on the left and the right, such as Jon Stewart, Dinesh D'Souza, and Dennis Prager. He's probably most well known for his famous book, God is Not Great: How Religion Poisons Everything, in which he laid out many of the arguments against religion. He was always unapologetically honest, clear, and quick-witted in discussing his views, regardless of the backlash he would receive or the controversy he would stir up. Within his many years of writing and speaking, he collected many enemies, but also many allies, Richard Dawkins, Sam Harris, and Daniel Dennett being a few of them. He wasn't the first man to speak out against the wrongs of religion, but he definitely was the most clear-spoken and strong-minded. He not only inspired many religious people to leave behind the shackles of religion, but he also inspired a generation of freethinkers to finally speak out. The case against religion was no longer in the background or hidden in society, but at the forefront. People could finally debate this subject without fear of being outcasts in society. He wrote over 30 books on topics diverse as Mother Teresa, the left, the right, Islam, religion, politics, and the Clintons. Unfortunately, in 2011, while appearing on TV shows and speaking events, he was diagnosed with esophageal cancer. Over the next year, he would fight to continue living. Although he fought hard, it was eventually a losing battle. Throughout this year of fighting cancer, he wrote what would become his final book. It's a short booklet lasting only about 70 pages, in which he discusses the slow progress of cancer and contemplates what would become his inevitable death. The book begins by what seems like classic writing by Christopher Hitchens. Long paragraphs starting with how he found out about his cancer, then how he dealt with his cancer, and eventually at the end, the words tapered off into short statements. But even then, you could tell he never lost his wit, and he continued to try to write, even as it became difficult for him. He wrote long, strongly worded messages against the religious people who thought he would finally turn his back on his atheistic ideas and turn to God in the face of his imminent demise. He never did anything of the sort, and continued to write to the day of his death. The conclusion is a beautifully worded message on the life and the work of Christopher Hitchens, written by his wife. Mortality, although short, is perhaps one of the best examples of how someone who has left the comfort of religion faces death head-on, without wavering on the realization that death, in all likelihood, is the end. That as we close our eyes for that final sleep, we do not wake up. It is the end, and we cease to exist. Here are a few short passages from Mortality by Christopher Hitchens. Page 1. I have more than once in my time woken up feeling like death, but nothing prepared me for the early morning in June when I came to consciousness, feeling as if I were actually shackled to my own corpse. The whole cave of my chest and thorax seemed to have been hollowed out and then refilled with slow-drying cement. I could faintly hear myself breathe, but could not manage to inflate my lungs. My heart was beating either much too much or much too little. Any movement, however slight, required forethought and planning. It took strenuous effort for me to cross the room of my New York hotel and summon the emergency services. They arrived with great dispatch and behaved with immense courtesy and professionalism. I had the time to wonder why they needed so many boots and helmets and so much heavy backup equipment. But now that I view the scene in retrospect, I see it as a very gentle and firm deportation, taking me from the country of the well across the stark frontier that marks off the land of malady. Within a few hours, having had to do quite a lot of emergency work on my heart and my lungs, the physicians at this sad border post had shown me a few other postcards from the interior and told me that my immediate next step would have to be with an oncologist. Some kind of shadow was throwing itself across the negatives. Page 22. The tone of the prayers replicates the silliness of the mandate. in that God is enjoined or thanked to do what he was going to do anyway. Thus the Jewish male begins each day by thanking God for not making him into a woman or a Gentile, while the Jewish woman contents herself with thanking the Almighty for creating her as she is. Presumably, the Almighty is pleased to receive this tribute to his power and the approval of those he's created. It's just that, if he is truly Almighty, the achievement would seem rather a slight one. My chief consolation in this year of living dyingly has been in the presence of friends. I can't eat or drink for pleasure anymore, so when they offer to come, it's only for the blessed chance to talk. Some of these comrades can easily fill a hall with paying customers, avid to hear them. They are talkers with whom it's a privilege just to keep up. Now at least I can do the listening for free. Can they come and see me? Yes, but only in a way. So now every day I go to a waiting room and watch the awful news from Japan on cable TV, often closed captioned, just to torture myself, and wait impatiently for a high dose of protons to be fired into my body at 2/3 the speed of light. What do I hope for? If not a cure, then a remission. And what do I want back? In the most beautiful apposition of two of the simplest words in our language, the freedom of speech. Now this was only a few passages from the book, and it is mightily short, but I do suggest that anyone who has enjoyed the work of Christopher Hitchens in the past pick up a copy of Mortality. It's his last work, beautifully written, and it is, perhaps, one of the best ways to remember the man that was Christopher Hitchens. Now I'll leave you with a few wise words from the man.
Yes. May as well start by establishing that ontological claim. Well, Friedrich Nietzsche famously said that God was dead, and Sigmund Freud can be rendered as having said that God was dad. And I think both of them are probably right. The concept of God is like everything else in our vocabulary, man-made. It's an invention of human beings. Unless you take the view that God made us, in which case it'd be a lot to explain. Why did we in that case make so many gods? It does seem to be very much more probable that men and women made many gods than that any one God made all men and women and the rest of creation. And as well as being man-made, it's fear-made. It is the unexpressed or partially expressed wish for a protector, a parent, someone who will never desert you, someone who will do in a way you're thinking for you, especially on questions of moral philosophy. At its best, it's that. It's a wish to be loved more than you probably deserve. And at its worst, it's the underdeveloped part of the human psyche that leads to totalitarianism, that wants to worship and that wants a boss, that wants a celestial dictatorship. And that's the bit that's now threatening to destroy our secular civilization. And so you're quite right to start where you do. It used to be believed, I mean, the number of gods now it's infinite, and a new god is created almost every day by some cult or other, but it used to be that. There was a belief that gods were in the trees, in the woods, in the springs, in the sea, in the clouds, and so forth. Polytheism of a kind. Then something a bit more polytheistic like Olympus, where there was at least a location for the divine, but it was multifaceted. And then monotheism, getting it down to one. So I regard this as progress of a sort, because they're getting nearer the true figure all the time. Remember that there are two questions. Well, I better now say, lest I be accused of not having exhausted the entire subject in my first response, I better say there are at least two questions. One is this: is there a God, a creator, a prime mover, an uncaused cause, whatever you like to call it? And this was the question answered at a certain point, not very long ago in our history, by the deists, people like Thomas Jefferson, Thomas Paine, and many others, who said that the order of the universe seemed to suggest that it couldn't just have been random, that there may have been a designer, but the designer didn't take any part in human affairs. And that, in the late 17th, early 18th centuries was probably, late 18th, early 19th centuries was probably a very intelligent position to hold. It was as far, pre-Einstein, pre-Darwin, was probably as far as you were likely to get with philosophical speculation. But so believing that there might be a cause or a mover or a creator is one thing, but believing that there is a supervising, intervening entity who cares who wins the war, who cares who you sleep with and in what way, who cares what you eat and on what day, and in other words, who makes you the center of the whole cosmos, is another thing altogether. So people who say, I believe in God, I'm a deist, have all their work in front of them before they can say that they are really religious.
Are you prepared to be a deist?
No.
No divine mover, even at the whatever, the origin?
There's nothing in the natural, in the cosmic order, or that's the macro level, or the micro level, that's to say the constituent of our own DNA and the things that we have in common with the other animals, and indeed other forms of life like plants, that isn't susceptible to a much better explanation.
Well, here's...
As the great physicist Laplace said when he demonstrated his working model, his orrery as it's called, of the solar system to the emperor, and Napoleon said, well, I see there's no God in this system, and Laplace said, well, Your Majesty, it works without that assumption.
Hello, I'm Kendall Butler, and I hope you enjoyed that video. A link to the Amazon page on Christopher Hitchens is below. Please like, comment, subscribe, and have a nice day.